It's a real pleasure now to introduce Chris Foster, Vice President with Booz Allen Hamilton. And what I hope you'll find both interesting, fascinating, and stimulating about this presentation is it all evolved in a conference call, which got very excitable, I remember, back in October last year. And I think you'll be fascinated by how Chris and his team took it forward.
I got a feeling that tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good night. That tonight's gonna be a good
Please welcome Chris Foster.
Thank you. The music's a little foreshadowing for the awards tonight, right?
Why do we treat the measurement and evaluation of communications as an add-on? How do we ensure that practitioners realize the power of communications to solve real business problems and track impact? Do our metrics show business results, or are we merely counting impressions? The reality is that over the past 3 years, communications and measurement budgets have taken a hit. In today's world, how do we prove we are doing more with less? Here are the facts. C-suite officials prefer outcome-oriented metrics, require articulation of actual value versus perceived value, stand by measurable objectives. Researchers and PR practitioners understand that we must be able to measure communications to solve real business problems. Believe we must establish a standardized approach to measurement throughout an organization, and feel we must break down the barriers to communications measurement. There is a disconnect between the C-suite's view and the practitioner's perspective regarding the value we offer. It is time to seize our opportunity to fill this gap, take our seat at the boardroom table, and influence business decisions. We are called to drive business results. When will we stand and deliver?
So, it's always been fun for us to sort of be engaged in this project, as Barry mentioned, over the last year and a half right now, because what we've been doing is we didn't sort of set out to be where we are today. We set out to try to answer some fundamental questions. Are there any trends or patterns that we're seeing across the geography, across sort of globally, around measurement, evaluation, and communication? We didn't know the answer to that question. That led us to finding sort of suggestions that there may be a little bit of a disconnect between the expectations of PR professionals and how they're interacting with the measurement and evaluation professionals, which then led us further to hearing more and more around the disconnect that existed between the C-suite and what they want and what we're giving them. So we set out to try to figure that out and think that through. And we did find that there is a gap. We did quite a bit of extensive research globally, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that, but this is not, we sort of looked at this not just from a US or Eurocentric view, we sort of looked across the globe, and we've been sharing insights and perspectives along the way. What we've come down with is we did a combination of qual and quant, about 500 or so quantitative interviews, just under 40 qual, and very recently, we did some in-depth, very, very deep dives, an hour and a half conversations with C-suite executives representing these particular industries. So it's not just one sector focused. So this is what we're measuring today. What we're looking at, we've heard this, right? We're talking about outputs. We're also doing quite a bit of work in the survey, and survey has felt like it's sort of leading edge to some extent. Where we sort of dive deeper into this business ROI is down at the bottom right, is sort of this leads generation. We don't push on that as much as I'd like to, but this is sort of the current state. But there are some key insights that we learned from the C-suite. One is that business KPIs are highly quantitative, but they're not always published widely throughout an organization. So as we talk about needing to get and drive towards these ROIs, we don't always know as communications and measurement professionals what those are. So how can you solve a problem or identify, develop a communications program or a measurement program that solves a business problem if you're not sure what those are? So we need to do a much better job at trying to drive towards that as well. We also believe that we've also seen that in the digital space, those that are most familiar with measurement say they should still be quantitatively evaluated. But the interesting thing around this is there's a challenge in the digital space. And what I mean by that is there's a need for, and this has created a wide dynamic, there's a need for speed. The digital environment has created a need for speed and expectations around getting measurement results back instantly, in real time. And I'm not necessarily sure we've responded to that need. Executives agree that there's a need for some behaviors and attitudes that are going to help communications integrate more effectively into the C-suite. And here's something that continues to come out more and more, is that communications executives need to think, speak, and behave like business people first. And what I'd say, I lean into this a little more, is communication is a business. And it is a business tool, it is a weapon, it is a solution. And I think there's an expectation among the C-suite that we lean into that a little more than we are currently. The other interesting piece is that, and I started hearing this, and I want to dive deeper into this, but that communications should start to think about, do we need to still draw the line between internal and external communications? And I'm going to take a moment here and talk about that. I look at internal audiences as key stakeholders, right? They are evidence of the brand promise I'm making. They're brand ambassadors. I think in the Nissan presentation earlier today, they said they're an extension of my public relations department. So why would they be different? In fact, we take it a step further at Booz Allen. I've got a team of 4,500 consultants who are working across multiple business sectors. I actually use that group as a panel. I query them and survey them all the time to get insights on what the effectiveness of things we're doing. I also incubate innovative ideas around engagement. I'm testing a digital engagement platform right now with our employees to then take that and deliver that to clients with a proof of concept. So I think we need to look differently around what communication can do and how we, and I do not believe that there's one way to communicate internally and one way to communicate externally. I think those lines are blurring. Interesting, there is a gap among C-suite communications executives regarding the importance and desirability of quantitative measurements. And I'm going to talk about that in the next slide, because I think this is profound. And I would say this is going to create an opportunity for us. It's probably less of a challenge than it'll be downstream an opportunity. And I do think, and I'll talk to you about that, we've talked a lot about these financial metrics. I think everyone sort of referenced business and financial metrics. Well, we dug deep in our survey and results to figure out what those are. And we've got sort of 4 big buckets that we should be thinking about as to how to quantify that. And then the third point here in the slide is that the senior level communication executives should engender in their staff an alliance within the organization rather than a function. Communication is not a tactic, it's a strategy. And it permeates all of organization. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. And I think if we think about that from that standpoint, we'll be less in the shadows and more at the forefront. So this is what's happening, and this is an interesting slide. We heard sort of conflicting things from the communications professionals. And so it's a little bit of a schizophrenic mindset. On one hand, we say, yes, we really still want our communications programs to be measured by sort of intuition and feel, rather than hard numbers, which to me is shocking, but I think that we still see some of that. Then we have on the flip side of it, well, implementing qualitative measures of communications is an ineffective use of money and time. Right? Okay, and then communications can be quantitatively evaluated. It's a disadvantage within the C-suite without such metrics. So what this tells me is 2 things. C-suite still wants some of the softer insights, right? We still want sentiment, we still want we still want some of the, I want to raise awareness, I want people to feel good about me, but I also need, when the rubber meets the road and decisions are being made around how to allocate resources, we must make, that the link is going to be made to the business. And I think that's the balance that I see there as well, and that's what's happening. So, I pulled a few quotes out from some of the results because I think it was very interesting. And the gap is, the measurement gap for us is y'all see people, reporting on clips and saying we had 25 tweets. And what does that mean? And here's one of the things that there's an underlying trend relative to the gap in expectations. So when we talk about outputs, and I get confused as well between outputs and outtakes, but when we talk about outputs, it's one thing to say that I've got a 5% favorability spike, right? And that sounds like it's a good thing. I have no idea if it's good or bad, depending on what the baseline is. But what I want to know is, what did that do for me? What did that do for my business? So what does favorability mean for me as I'm trying to drive a brand or manage reputation differently? And that's where I think there's a point in time at which all the technology is very exciting. And we have fascinating technology that allows us to mine millions of data sources in real time, track patterns, trends, and ideas. But there's a human element as well. which I think is the natural marriage between PR professionals and measurement evaluation professionals. And what we keep seeing is that the measurement folks, we are relying a lot on technology. Very fancy dashboards and algorithms and communication analytics that I think are really important. But that in and of itself is not going to drive us to the ROI. That's going to provide us the insights that are going to allow us to make decisions that drive our business. And I think that's the power of measurement communication working in tandem with PR professionals. And for me, I don't separate them. So as we're doing our work at Booz Allen, and those, I think, some may have heard me say this, I don't see a difference between measurement, evaluation, and PR. It's the same thing. I can't do my job as a communications executive without measurement. All my work begins, it's in the beginning, the middle, and end, and it's continuous. It's not a moment in time, and it should not be looked at as such. And I think one of the things that I've heard, and that we keep hearing is, in addition to there being a disconnect between what the C-suite expects and what we're giving them, there's a disconnect between what PR professionals want and need and what the measurement companies are giving us. Right? I've heard on 5 separate occasions, simple, simple, simple. The dashboard's important, but it needs simplicity. And we heard around the fact around ROI, well, how do I know what an ROI is unless I really dive deep and try to really get into the texture of an organization? That's not done with dashboards and technology. That's done with conversations. That's done by really trying to look at what an organization's presence is in the market. But I think when we saw the disconnect, when we see the disconnect, it means 2 different things to us. I thought this was an atrocious quote that we got from one of our folks that we interviewed, but I thought it was worth mentioning just because it's a direct quote from a senior PR communications executive in the C-suite. What I take away from this is one thing, that there's sort of this very dichotomous view on what it is we're doing and what we're measuring. But there's also bleeding into the fact that as PR and communication professionals, we have to believe in the power of the trade. If we don't believe in the power of communications to solve business problems, then we're not really going to have earned a seat at the table. I believe that for most problems that our clients present themselves with, communication is a part of the solution. I absolutely believe that. And therefore, I believe I earned a seat at that table because I'm going to be a part of the solutions as much as a CFO, a chief medical officer, or folks in R&D. And I think we have to start to think that way and believe in the power of the profession. So how do we close the gap? All right, so there are a few things that continue to stick out and that are important to us. One is I think we need to start to speak in the business of communications. We're business people first, and communication professionals second. And I wouldn't mistake that as to me saying that communications is second. What I mean that is communications is a business. But as we talk about communications, as we talk about what it can do, I think we need to put a business lens on that. And while ROI is in a large extent sometimes directly linked to finances, there are other things that would constitute ROI, and I'm going to talk about in the next slide. And I think we need to position communications better as a means to an end, which I don't see that we always do as well, and I'll talk about that in the next slide. So we looked at exactly what do we need to do in order to sort of drive to this ROI. And ROI sort of fell into 4 broad categories. One, obviously, there was revenue, profit, investment, volume indicators. That's natural. And I do believe, and I heard some evidence earlier this morning, and we certainly have that at Booz Allen, that we are directly linking some of the engagements that we're doing to financial performance. There are financial market measures. These are things that are happening to us, right? So in publicly traded companies, there are expectations around financial performance that are just that are out there that we need to drive towards. The non-financial internal measures are important, and I'll pick on one. I know down to the nickel what it's going to cost me when I lose a staff person at the manager level, and what's going to cost to replace them. Right? I know that based on the levels we have and the experience we have. So if I'm able to drive an engagement program with my employees, and I can raise or reduce attrition and retain more staff, I can put a dollar value on that. I don't think we think about the power of communications from that standpoint. So in addition, and we only think about that when we think about our employees as stakeholders. But I can tell you that if I'm looking at 21% attrition, which is not unlikely in my industry, that can represent, quite frankly, close to $1 million or $1.5 million a year. So what can you do we could thwart that through different engagement. And the other thing that's really fascinating, I think this is an opportunity for us, is that the communications landscape is changing drastically. I'd say even 5, 6 years ago, we were so focused on pushing information out. I'd say it was an 80-20. 80% was pushing out and 20% was pulling in. It's different today. And I think this is driven largely by a lot of the work that folks do in the room, but also the social media dynamic. I'd say now it's 80-20 the reverse. I say 80% of the communications I do is listening, and 20% is actually pushing out. Because there's an expectation among our stakeholders for a highly targeted, highly customized, highly personalized way of communication and communicating engagement. And given the way information moves, all information moves digitally, the way I experience brands today, I can control. I can control a lot of my brand experiences. Whether it's a consumer product, I can control because I'm getting a lot of information in the digital space. And I'd say beyond just digital, it's mobile. And I can decide when, where, how I interact. I can turn you off, I can turn you on. So you have to meet, one of the things we're seeing, we have to meet our stakeholders where they are, not where we want them to be. And that's been an interesting undercurrent that we're seeing a lot more in the research we're doing broadly at Booz Allen. But I do believe if we start to think of it from that perspective, it'll absolutely empower us as a communication function, but it'll also help the C-suite understand the gap and the problem that exists among engaging stakeholders and the role that communication can play in that. And then competitive market metrics are always important. So we continue to look at that as well. So the things that I think are important for us to continue to do as we link communications to business objectives is to think more strategically and ask the questions. What is the business objective? You know, I spend a lot of time with the folks, the clients I partner with, trying to understand what the problem is they want to solve. I try to diagnose the problem. Because 9 times out of 10, as I'm working, and I'm not saying this is across the board, but I think it is, the problems that you present with are rarely the problems you end up solving. It's the cliche, a client comes to you and says, I want a front page Wall Street Journal article, and you know, we've all sort of gotten that. And my question is, well, what is that going to do for you? What do you want that to do for you? And I may find out that that's actually not what you need to drive the business. What you really need is a different engagement program for a specific stakeholder set. Oh, and by the way, I need to know in real time if the activities I'm doing are moving the needle or not. So what we're trying to do more of at Booz Allen is we are now doing a lot of work on the front end. I spend a lot of time doing research on the front end to get the insights I need on the customer stakeholder sets. Then trying to understand what those drivers are, whether it's a driver of reputation, whatever that is, so that I can then track in sort of real time, if I'm engaging a stakeholder set, did it actually move the needle? And then I'll have to pivot on a dime. And that ability to pivot also speaks to the power of communication. And that's also what stakeholder audiences do we need to influence. You know, I think we know now, sort of gone are the days of the shotgun approach. Communications now needs to be highly surgical and needs to be highly personalized, which creates a challenge for us as well. But I'd say, as we started talking more and more to the C-suite and explaining customer segmentation, audience segmentation, and the differences around expectations around those audiences, light bulbs began to come off around exactly what we can do for them. What are the barriers that are going to exist? Right? We know we sort of want to run off and solve problems, which is a good thing. What's going to get in the way? And oftentimes what will get in the way is less about what's happening in the external place and more about how I'm aligned as an organization. It's sort of the internal stuff that gets in the way. And in some cases, we get in our own way. And then what are the activities that can best reach your audience and support the business objective, or objectives plural? There's also a halo effect that we continue to see. And that's why I made the comment earlier that communication doesn't exist in a vacuum. So as we look at communication at Booz Allen, at my firm, I believe that there are, and we do technology, we do analytics, we do a lot of consulting work, and communication is a part of all of it. And whether it's our finance department, I mean, communication is at the underbelly of a lot of things. So we need to look at, as I mentioned around retention, we need to look across organizations and try to find those areas where our communication can give us an extra lift. Because again, it just puts into perspective, puts into context the power of what we're doing. So, how do we put this into practice? What are we supposed to do? So some of you guys may have seen this. One, I think we should keep calm. I'd also want to add and keep it simple, but keep calm and commit. We need to commit to closing the gap. We need to commit to believing in the power of communications. We need to commit And the gap, I'd say, is twofold. There is one gap from the C-suite and the client space. We have to find a way, and I heard that this theme came out for me yesterday that I was a little surprised about, is the fact that I think as measurement and evaluation professionals, we need to listen to the PR communications folks and what they're saying. They're asking for something we're not giving them. I think it's important. And we need to, as important as the solutions are, think about putting the solutions in the context around solving a business problem. We need to engage. We need to be a part of this dialogue and discussion. These can't be we can't have these annual moments in time when we sort of think about this and get energized and we run off. This needs to be continuous. Part of what I would hope is, what we've seen is, there's a lot of work that needs to happen between now and the meeting next year. We need to sort of find ways to collaborate and partner so that we can engage and be part of this solution, part of closing this gap. And then I'd say, keep calm and measure the future. Measurement is not going away. And what I'd say is, quite frankly, measurement evaluations can probably exist without communications. But communications will not thrive without measurement evaluation. That's a fact. So, I say, if we boil it down, I would say that education is key. And education's broad. And I think the challenge for us here and the challenge for AMAC is, how do we educate? How do we educate one another? How do we educate such a wide, vast array of stakeholders? And what does that look like? And I think we need to figure that out. I think we're going to talk a lot about that this afternoon. So the big ahas from my standpoint was that the gap between what C-suite professionals are asking for and what we're giving them, we're not aligned as a profession around the power of communications and what it can do, I think is another aha. I think is the third for me is the ability and the power of the marriage between measurement and communications. It's not a separate entity. So with that, I have 3 minutes, and I'll answer any questions if you have them, or I can give the podium back to Barry.
We see this as a really important study that Booz Allen Hamilton have carried out for us. So I'm looking for a question to Chris.
I guess I should explain Booz Allen too. Chris.
Hi, Chris. Thanks very much for a great presentation. You mentioned the gap. You mentioned keep calm and commit and engage and all that good stuff. But what about underlying your thesis is the need for us to connect not just with an attitude maybe, but also connect with data. How can we, and maybe you can throw up some practical examples of how can we connect to business data rather in parts of the organizations to ensure that we actually get on the scorecard of the C-suite better? Because it strikes me that there's a data connection piece that's missing here.
Well, there is a data connection piece, and what I'd say is we don't go get the data. So what I'd say is oftentimes we look at the campaign. Let's say we're doing a communication, we focus on the campaign. And is the campaign delivering media? And then at some point we'll probably think about the stakeholder, but that's when we're really into it. We're into execution. What we do is I spend much more time on the front end trying to understand who it is I'm trying to move and what does movement mean for them. And then I'm communicating that broadly throughout organizations early, before even engaging in a campaign, because what I think I want to do may not be, in fact, that may not move the needle. And it's not until I get those insights and really dive into the stakeholder set, and 9 times out of 10, I have to force our clients to look at the C-suite and the board of directors as part of the internal stakeholder set, right? So I link directly to, and I'm working for a large multinational company right now on a global reputation for them, and I know that the work that we are doing is directly linked to the bonuses.
Chris, just step back a bit.
So that I wouldn't have gotten that, Chris, had I not done the work on the front end and started asking those tough questions. So I see that's sort of one of the examples I do there. And again, it's a little different. I didn't talk a lot about Booz Allen and sort of who we are, but we're a management consulting firm. And I'd say we love to partner with PR firms. And within Booz Allen, I've got 700 people who focus on strategic communications externally. And that's very client-facing, both for the U.S. federal government and commercial clients. Prior to Booz Allen, I spent 12 years in large global PR firms. I was at Burson Marsteller, Fleishman Hill. I know what it's like. I mean, a lot of I'm a client to vendors, many of you in the room work for us. So I understand. I'm not coming at this problem, somewhat disconnected. I'm in it and living. I'm living it in a daily basis. So I would say we need to try to get at that texture much earlier than the end. And sometimes it's as simple as asking the question. We don't often ask the question, what are the business metrics? We ask what the communication metrics are, always. We're good about that, what the communication objectives are. But what does it mean to the business? And it's digging deeper. I need to see an increase in positive media coverage. I need to see a change in attitude and awareness. Okay, that's great. What is that going to do for the business? So let's go talk to the folks in finance. Let's go talk to the folks in human resources. Let's go talk to the folks in marketing. What is it going to do to the business early? And then so we can link them.
Our thanks to Chris. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.